you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie and welcome to another episode of Booksmart. Today's book is a memoir, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I did not know this story prior to reading this book. Miller published her book in 2019. Her sexual assault happened in 2015. While her assault made the news, it was her victim's statement she read in court that went viral. Once I got to that part of the book, I vaguely remembered a little bit of it. But I went into this book not knowing or remembering any of that. But I did already know that victims of sexual assault are not identified by their real names in a court of law. Miller was referred to as Emily Doe in legal proceedings. I was struck immediately by a quote she placed between her short introduction and chapter 1. It's by Toni Morrison, who said, "When you know your name, you should hang on to it, for unless it is noted down and remembered, it will die when you do." And then I felt an immediate camaraderie with Miller on her first page when she states, "I am shy," then lists all her little habits that make her invisible. I related to this invisibility and even with her lack of assertiveness at her age. As I've aged, I don't let doctors speak down to me, and I draw very clear boundaries at work with what is my responsibility and what isn't. But in my 20s, I was like Miller in many ways. A simple summary of her assault goes like this. On the urging of her younger sister, Miller attends a Stanford party, even though she has aged out of the college scene. She gets drunk, blacks out, and wakes up in the hospital. Two guys on bikes interrupted the assault. She was behind a dumpster, unconscious, while a guy, Brock Turner, penetrated her with his fingers. The first chapter is powerful, as we as readers are learning information as Miller learns it. She doesn't know what has happened, and no one gives her the complete story from start to finish. In fact, she reads more of the details online since it made the news. Her writing is breathtaking as she writes of her confusion and of her embarrassment. She doesn't even ask many questions of the police or the doctors or anyone to figure out exactly what has happened to her. Miller even apologizes to her sister for making her worry. She's naive about the legal process, which I think is actually a good thing, while she navigates those first few hours. Her details are gorgeous, even noting the long shower she took despite California's water shortage and how that made her feel guilty. Miller is abundantly aware, even though she has so little knowledge of all that has been done to her body. Not just the assault, but the examination at the hospital and the collection of evidence, like the paint on her labia and how what she needed to clean was internal, not external. I was so absorbed in her story that I didn't want to put the book down. The bulk of the book deals with the legal ramifications of pressing charges. Not the legal ramifications of Brock, mind you, but how Miller was interrogated and criticized and judged and blamed. She was not prepared for such a response. This part was all too familiar for me. I had been watching LA Law since I was in junior high. I knew rape victims were blamed. The accused seared itself in my memory. It was standard practice at the time, almost expected, that the victim would be torn apart while the rapist was somehow excused for his behavior. I don't think much has changed since the 80s and 90s. When I was in college, a man broke into my house in the middle of the night where I lived with 3 other girls and tried to rape me. I fought him off. The police never caught him. Months later, I figured out who had done it. It was some guy I had gone out with on one date a year and a half ago. Because I knew I would be torn apart for so many reasons, I decided not to go to the police. I didn't drink, so no one could at least accuse me of that, but I figured the rest of my decisions from the time I was born would be used against me in a court of law. Like I wear dresses all the time, so that would be problematic. And this was the later 90s when not too many girls wore dresses to parties. As I debated about going to the police, I knew I needed to take all my journals and bring them back to my parents' house and hide them. Either that or burn them. I feared they could be used against me. The fact that I didn't recognize him, even though it was dark, would be interpreted as I dated so many guys I couldn't remember them. My grandpa had had a stroke, so I didn't even confide in my mother because she had other things to deal with. I just never told a soul. I was married when I finally told my husband, but I worried for years that I had done the wrong thing by not coming forward. I read and researched enough true crime to know that if my attacker broke into the next girl's house, he would be more prepared, perhaps even bring a weapon the next time. But I was 20 at the time of the attack. I knew better than to trust cops and lawyers and judges. LA Law showed me precisely how victims were treated. I regret it now because now at my age, go ahead and criticize my actions. I won't let people in positions of authority make me feel small anymore. But when I was in my 20s, that was also mortifying. I felt I had no voice, which is exactly what Miller's memoir addresses. Her memoir gives a voice to all victims of rape. In fact, reading her book helped me forgive myself for not coming forward because Miller is so understanding of anyone in her circumstances. The legal system blatantly protects the rapist. The judge in Miller's case states this of the rapist. Obviously, a prison sentence would have a severe impact on him. The adverse collateral consequences on the defendant's life resulting from the felony conviction. But it was the rapist's actions that caused this. He is 100% at fault, yet the judge, who was a man, is rationalizing the rapist's behavior. The judge refers to the assault as the incident and the unfortunate result. Why are we concerned about the impact of the punishment on the perpetrator when the judge has mentioned nothing about the lifelong consequences on Miller? Insert Hubert-like swearing here because this is how much I want to swear. Miller also brings up an excellent point. The rapist gets to have character witnesses. The victim doesn't get such privilege. Instead, we interrogate the victim seeking to find culpability in her actions, dress, or past relationships, yet she does not get to have witnesses to argue for her character. It's heartbreaking and infuriating. This happened in 2015, remember. This is not something from Little House on the Prairie times or even from the 1980s when Laura married a rapist Luke in the wedding of the century in General Hospital. This is 2015, yet with the way women are treated when they are sexually assaulted, it might as well be 1865. Anyone who has been assaulted lives with it for the rest of their lives. The sanctity of my pink bedroom was forever annihilated. I slept with a nightlight for years. I don't even order pizza for delivery anymore because I'd rather not have a stranger coming to my house. My assault happened over 20 years ago, yet I've never taken an Uber by myself. I'm not sure I ever will. When I watched an episode of Grey's Anatomy with a woman who came into the ER after a rape, I was fine at first, until they cut her fingernails into an envelope. I visibly cringed and sunk into the couch, and it hung on me for days after that. The police didn't cut my long fingernails, but they scraped underneath them into one of those little small evidence envelopes. Of all things, that's what got to me. I'd like to tell the judge in Miller's case that he's got it all messed up. I'd love to use the F word about 1,000 times during this episode, but I'm restraining myself. That we should be looking at the lifelong effects an assault has on the victim. Why is a rapist's behavior explained if he's been drinking? But it's the victim's fault if the victim's been drinking? Miller addresses one of these paradoxes, and there's many of them, but this one is about how we view people. During trial, the jury was forced to pick. Is he wholesome or monstrous? But I never questioned that any of what they said about him was true. In fact, I need you to know it was all true. The friendly guy who helps you move and assist senior citizens in the pool is the same guy who assaulted me. One person can be capable of both. Society often fails to wrap its head around the fact that these truths often coexist. They are not mutually exclusive. Bad qualities can hide inside a good person. That's the terrifying part. If we can reconcile the rapist as not being a 100% rotten person, why can't we extend such complexity to the victim? If the victim's been drinking at a party, society is quick to judge her for putting herself in danger, for making bad choices, for acting less than ladylike as if we are living in a Jane Austen novel. The victim is reduced to a less than human prop, a caricature, an archetype of the worst kind, simplified into dust. Why is it that that is the way we still treat victims? As the story continues, we as readers get to blossom right along with Miller as she grows. We feel her getting stronger and courageous. She's questioning everything now. She goes back to doing stand-up comedy and shares with us a funny bit she did with about the guy who assaulted her friend. She's witty and daring and sarcastic, and it's so on point. She's even shut out of her own case, realizing after the fact that life-size photographs of her private parts were blazoned across screens during the trial. Yet she's not going to be silent anymore. She's not Emily Dill. She's Chanel Miller. Ultimately, she takes her name back. After reading her victim's statement to the court, it's published with her name online. She's praised and celebrated and gives a voice to thousands of women who couldn't find theirs. It's through this publication that she gains back some of what the system took from her. Here's what she wrote in response to Brock's 90-day sentence. And yes, you heard that correctly. He only got 90 days. At the very start of the sentencing, the judge said that the question he had to ask himself was, is incarceration in state prison the right answer for the poisoning of Chanel's life? I thought it had been strange the way he'd phrased it. To him, my lost job, my damaged hometown, my small savings account, my stolen pleasures had all amounted to 90 days in county jail. I wondered if, in their eyes, the victim remained stagnant, living forever in that 20-minute time frame. She remained frozen while Brock grew more and more multifaceted, his stories unfolding, a spectrum of life and memories opening up around him. He got to be a person. Where was her redemption story? Nobody talked about the things she might go on to do. I had laid my suffering bare, but I lacked a key element. The judge had given Brock something that would never be extended to me. Empathy. My pain was never more valuable than his potential. That is a beautiful passage. She writes in a notebook over and over again that she is worth more than 3 months, and so is every other victim of sexual assault. I don't have much to criticize about the book. Sure, at times the writing sounds more like one would talk than write, with cliches and other tired phrases, but it flows so well it doesn't jar you out of the story. My one complaint is that I'm not sure I understand all the details of what happened that night. Maybe that's what Miller intended, as she didn't fully know herself until she read all the files about it later. But that's where I would have liked a bit more of a linear narrative unfolding. The only other question I pose with her narrative structure is where she places her victim's statement, which is what brought attention to her name and went viral in the first place. She places it in full at the end of the book. It's rather lengthy, yet it's essentially a summary of the book you just read. It weakens its impact because I already know all the stuff in it. I know she's got a wicked sense of humor, of sarcastic tone and word choice, and I know the story now. Perhaps putting it in the beginning would have had the same impact on the reader as finding it online when it was first posted, although then you would know the overall story before reading the book, hence the dilemma. Miller's memoir is inspirational on so many levels. It is never the victim's fault, no matter what circumstances have occurred. Victims are treated as witnesses, not victims, and then they're treated like the guilty party. I know part of this is a result of our patriarchal society, but it's also a way to protect us from the horrors of the world. We convince ourselves that there's a reason a rape happens. If we do A, B, and C, or don't do X, Y, and Z, it can't happen to us. But it can. It can happen to anyone. Instead of judging the victim, we should empathize. We should direct our anger at the perpetrator. The rapist is to blame, no one else. Victims of sexual assault should not have to cower in fear of being judged and blamed. And Miller has shown us that we don't have to worry about being named either. She reclaimed her name and her identity. Despite her rape and her experiences with the subsequent legal proceedings, her ending is inspiring and offers so much hope in a society that sometimes operates like Alice in Wonderland. If you have experienced sexual assault or know someone who has, you must read this book. If you know someone who has been arrested for rape, you need to read this book. If you work in the legal field, you need to read this book. If you work in the medical field and treat those who have been sexually assaulted, you need to read this book. If you are a parent, you should read this book and then share it with your children when you feel it is age appropriate. I can't think of one person who shouldn't read this book. We forget the power of storytelling, whether it's fiction or narrative nonfiction. Stories teach us empathy. Stories allow us to experience things we might never otherwise experience. We become more open-minded. We can begin to understand people better, which helps foster relationships. And stories aid us in becoming more compassionate people. Miller has done a fabulous job at writing her story to share her experiences so that others can learn from it or find hope within its pages. Know My Name is a book you need to read. Thanks for watching. My goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.